I've talked a lot about Mario Kart tracks on this channel before, including ranking them from every game, shameless plug by the way, but today I want to focus on something different, the most underrated tracks in the series. When I say underrated, I don't just mean tracks that people think are bad. Well, I mean, that could be one factor, I guess. I'm talking more so about the ones that get overshadowed, overlooked, or just don't get nearly as much love as they deserve. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get right into it. So I thought it would be fitting to start off this list with the starting track from Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, Mario Kart Stadium. Now here's the thing, starter tracks in Mario Kart serve a very different purpose than most other courses. They need to introduce core mechanics effectively while still being simple enough not to overwhelm new players. And in Mario Kart 8's case, there was one very important new mechanic that Nintendo needed to get right, anti-gravity. This was a bizarre addition at the time, and Nintendo had to win players over immediately. Thankfully, Mario Kart Stadium nails it. It uses just enough anti-gravity to change up the feel of a classic circuit without making it too chaotic or disorienting. The track layout flows perfectly, keeping the race engaging while subtly reinforcing the new mechanic. But even beyond the tutorial aspect, this track is just fun to drive on. You've got a few well-placed shortcuts that reward skillful maneuvering and a glider section at the end that makes for some intense finishes. And I mean, for what's essentially a basic stadium course, the visuals are incredibly polished. It's got all the elements of a great track, yet somehow it rarely gets talked about, at least from my perception. But hey, maybe it's because it shares the Mario Circuit name with so many other tracks that people tend to overlook, which brings us to our next underrated pick, DS Mario Circuit. Now, I'm specifically talking about the remake of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, not because I think the original in DS was bad or anything, but because in the context of that game, I don't think that the track was really underrated. It was just another Mario circuit, but in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, damn, I like this track. This is actually a pretty challenging circuit track, especially on 200cc, which is something that I really respect. I think that a big reason why a lot of people overlook this track is just because of the overwhelming amount of circuit tracks in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, but in my humble opinion, this is one of the best ones in the whole game. Just look at the forest section with the wiggler that they added. This wasn't in the original DS version, and it gives the track a lot more character. It's no longer just a generic Mario circuit, now it has distinct obstacles and a more memorable setting. And then there's the final turn, which is one of the hardest in the game to take at full speed, especially on 200cc. This is a track where good driving actually matters. You need precise drifting, good use of braking, and some serious control if you want to master it. Yet despite all these improvements, it's still often written off as just another Mario circuit to so many people, which is really a shame. But speaking of Mario Kart DS tracks, let's talk about one that literally tries to burn you alive. That being Desert Hills. This is a track that we've seen in both Mario Kart DS and Mario Kart Wii, and honestly both versions are basically the same, so I'll just use the original to illustrate my points. Now I'll admit, I used to be one of those people who thought that this track was miserable. I thought it was frustrating to drive on, the fireballs were obnoxious, and that winding turn section at the end was just a nightmare to get through. But you know what? I've matured. I can now confidently say that this is not one of the worst Mario Kart DS tracks, and in fact I'd argue it's actually underrated. I wouldn't go as far as to call it one of the best, but I think the overwhelming negative perception makes it a perfect pick for this list. If you just play this track casually, then I mean, yeah, I can kind of see why you wouldn't like it, but if you learn how to really control your vehicle in Mario Kart DS, then this track becomes so much more fun. Those winding turns at the end go from feeling like a struggle to being an exhilarating sequence of tight mini turbos strung together one after another. Instead of slowing down and carefully navigating them, you can drift, boost, and chain together satisfying turns at high speed, and suddenly it's a completely different experience. The Angry Sun, ripped straight from the 2D Mario games, is also a great addition that gives the track some much needed personality. It's not just another desert track, it's actively out to get you, and I think that that's a fun touch. And one of my favorite things in a good Mario Kart track is shortcuts, and thankfully this track actually has some solid ones. Now if I had to pick my favorite version of this track, I'd probably go with the Mario Kart Wii iteration just because of how well it works with inside drifting, but when looking at how it stacks up in its original game, I think it's even more underrated in Mario Kart DS simply because it's so much more overlooked in favor of the other tracks from that game. But while this track might feel like a scorched, sunburned wasteland, we have a newer desert that isn't overlooked, rather outright hated by many. Yep, let's talk about Bone Dry Dunes from Mario Kart 8. This is probably the track that I've been the most vocal about over the years, and my opinion hasn't changed one bit. I still love this track track, and I think it deserves way more appreciation. First off, the music absolutely slaps. It's got this rugged, outlaw energy with acoustic guitars and pounding percussion that make the whole race feel like you're speeding through a lawless wasteland or something. It's raw, intense, and perfectly matches the chaotic feel of the course. And that chaos, it's what makes this track so good. A lot of people don't like how bumpy and uneven it is, but I think that's exactly why it stands out. And if 150 is wild, 200cc is completely unhinged. The extra speed amplifies everything, making the bumps even harder to predict and the turns even riskier to take at full speed. Maybe it's just because I don't play competitively, actually yeah, that probably is why, but I love how unpredictable this track feels. On top of all of that, the skeleton theme is just cool. You get to drive through a gigantic dry Bowser monument thing and dry piranha plants snapping at you. It's just awesome. It makes the track feel ancient, almost cursed, like you're racing through the ruins of something long forgotten. So between the killer music, chaotic design, and the awesome skeletal aesthetic, I really think that this track deserves more love. But while this track throws you into an unpredictable desert wasteland, my next pick throws you into the middle of something even more terrifying, driving downtown at night. Yup, let's talk about Mushroom City. Mushroom City is one of those head-scratching cases where a track has never really been brought back since Double Dash, and honestly, that just irritates me. Out of all the city-based tracks in a series, this one really gets overlooked a lot, and I think it deserves way more attention. The main reason I'm calling this one underrated is because I always see people talking about Mushroom Bridge way more. And while I do like Mushroom Bridge a lot, there are times where I actually prefer Mushroom City over it. It really just depends on the mood that I'm in. While Mushroom Bridge is bright, open, and straightforward, Mushroom City contrasts that with a darker, more chaotic downtown vibe. Instead of being linear, the track gives you multiple paths, allowing for more interactive racing strategies. And of course you have to deal with dodging traffic too, which just makes it even more insane. And probably my favorite part of the track is that final straightaway leading into the finish line with just how crazy it is with the hole in the middle of the road too. Now it's time to make Mushroom City look like complete child's play because holy shit, Moonview Highway. I'm focusing on the original Mario Kart Wii version here because I think it exemplifies everything I love about the track more than the remake does, though I'll give credit where credit is due, the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe version has its own strengths. This track is absolute chaos. It demands practice just to understand the flow of traffic, let alone navigate it at a high speed without getting obliterated. Unlike a lot of other traffic tracks where hazards are a bit more predictable, Moonview Highway constantly forces you to react. The cars follow different routes, move at varying speeds, and just overall keep you on your toes. And that's what makes it so much fun. You're always balancing risk and reward. Do you take turns tight, knowing full well that you might slam headfirst into a truck? Or do you take the wider, safer approach, giving yourself more time to react but losing a bit of speed? It creates a natural tension that few other Mario Kart tracks manage to replicate. And let's talk about the setting because it's gorgeous. The neon city lights bring so much atmosphere, creating this beautiful contrast between urban utopia and, well, imminent death via bomb car. It's visually stunning, mechanically engaging, and one of the most demanding tracks in the entire series. It's a track that rewards precision and finesse, yet still manages to be ridiculously fun even when you're completely screwing up. And for that, it absolutely deserves to be considered one of the most underrated. So let's talk about Banshee Boardwalk. Sure, it was brought back in Mario Kart DS, but I can only imagine how insane this could be with modern track design. But for now, we still have the original in Mario Kart 64, and honestly, it's still one of my favorites in that game. One of the biggest reasons I love this track is the music. Out of all the spooky Mario Kart tracks, this is probably my favorite soundtrack. It's got this unsettling, up-tempo energy, almost like it's trying to induce panic, like someone is watching you. It has this skin-crawling quality that perfectly matches the eerie, isolated atmosphere of the track. And speaking of that atmosphere, this track is genuinely creepy. Unlike other ghost-themed tracks that lean into cartoony, haunted house vibes, Banshee Boardwalk feels more desolate and unsettling. You're racing on this rickety wooden boardwalk surrounded by pitch-black water and dim lighting. The whole thing just feels abandoned, almost like you shouldn't even be here. And if that wasn't enough, this track is tough. Huge Huge chunks of it have no guardrails, and the narrow layout makes it so easy to fall off, especially when items start flying. It's less forgiving than most Mario Kart tracks, which I do kind of like. I also just love the concept of a spooky water-themed track in general. It's not just another haunted mansion or graveyard, it's a decaying, isolated boardwalk, and that setting alone makes it one of the most unique horror-themed tracks in the series. Another water-themed track that I've always deemed as underrated is Wario Shipyard from Mario Kart 7. In fact, this is another somewhat spooky one, although maybe not to the same extent that Banshee Boardwalk went for. This one really just comes down to the atmosphere though. Driving through this dilapidated ship is so much fun. And then there's the track design itself. Every turn flows incredibly well, and there's this one specific turn about halfway through, right when you exit the underwater section, that just feels insanely smooth. I don't really know exactly how to explain it. I guess it's kind of like the Mario Kart version of a massage. I also just find it interesting in general that a dark track like this is given its theming to Wario, where normally his tracks are loud and exciting. Overall though, really fun track that I still have a lot of fun racing on. Back to desert tracks, because apparently that's like my secret Mario Kart track design kink or something. Dry Ruins is literally right there. Seriously, not to keep harping on retro tracks that deserve to be brought back, but come on. I've been passionate about this track for a while now. I even made a whole video dissecting it, sorry for the plug, but yeah, my opinion hasn't really changed. This is the definitive Mario Kart desert track. Unlike so many other desert courses that just feel like flat open wastelands, this one has a dynamic layout that changes with each lap, making it feel alive in a way that most other tracks don't. And the strategy is absolutely wild. This track is loaded with shortcuts and intricate routes, and it's honestly kind of concerning how many advanced strategies competitive players have found to squeeze every possible advantage out of the course. Whether it's taking tight sand cuts or literally doing a wall glitch thing where you just trick into the inside of a wall inside the ruins, it's just out of this world. But even outside of the competitive scene, the theming is just top tier. The massive Sphinx statues and the way the sand gradually fills up the temple, and even that transition from racing in the open desert into navigating the interior of an ancient pyramid, it all makes for a visually and mechanically engaging track from start to finish. Finally, to round out this video, let's talk about Bowser's Castle, but not just any Bowser's Castle, the first good one. Back in the days when Nintendo loved making 4 different mediocre Bowser Castle tracks per game, Mario Kart 64 gave us one that actually stood out. And as time has gone on, I think this track is seriously underrated. Both the original and the Mario Kart Wii remake are great, especially in Wii with inside drifting mechanics, but for the sake of this video, I want to focus on the original version. The biggest thing that stands out about this track today is its atmosphere. Most 3D Bowser's Castle tracks go for bombastic, over-the-top spectacle. You've got wild heavy metal riffs in Mario Kart 8, fireballs soaring past you in Mario Kart Wii, you get the point. But in Mario Kart 64's Bowser's Castle, it's eerily quiet. Sure, there are some thwomps moving around and a few leaping fireballs, but for the most part, this track feels weirdly vacant. And honestly, that makes it even scarier than any other Bowser's Castle track in the series. Much like Banshee Boardwalk, this track's emptiness is exactly what makes it unsettling. And then there's the music. Instead of a high energy rock anthem, we got this chilling choir-like arrangement that feels haunting in the best way possible. It makes the track feel less like a chaotic lava fortress and more like an abandoned dungeon that you shouldn't really be racing through. And despite being dominated by straightaways, it's still a lot of fun to race on. So while every other Bowser's Castle is about absolutely wild spectacle, and there's nothing wrong with that, Mario Kart 64's version is just about an unsettling atmosphere that makes it unique. So yeah, that's just my dumbass opinion on what the most underrated tracks in Mario Kart are. But what about you? Which tracks do you think deserve more love and why? Drop your picks in the comments and let's see which ones people are sleeping on the most. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, peace out.